23 February, 1836, San Antonio, Texas. A young lieutenant stands on the crumbling wall of an old Spanish mission, squinting south through the winter haze. Then he sees it, a column of dust rising above the horizon. Not a cattle drive, not a trade caravan. It stretches across the entire southern road, wider than anything he's ever seen. He sends a runner to Colonel Travis. The message is 2 words: they're here. Within hours, nearly 1,500 Mexican soldiers under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna march into San Antonio and surround the compound. A blood-red flag is raised above the San Fernando church tower. In the Mexican military tradition, that flag carries a specific meaning. No quarter, no negotiation, no surrender will be accepted. Inside the old mission walls, roughly 200 Texan defenders watch that flag go up. They have 21 artillery pieces, enough black powder for maybe 2 weeks, limited food, and no realistic prospect of reinforcement. Outside, Santa Anna's force will grow to over 4,000 within days as additional columns arrive. The math is simple: 20 to 1, no relief coming, no way out, they stay anyway. And they hold that fort for 13 days against one of the largest armies in North America. This is the story of the Alamo, not the myth. The tactical reality of how 200 men held an indefensible position against overwhelming force for nearly 2 weeks, and why those 13 days ended up reshaping an entire continent. To understand why these men were behind those walls in the first place, you need to understand what Texas was in 1836. It wasn't a state. It wasn't a country. It was a Mexican province that had been actively colonized by American settlers since 1821, when the Mexican government invited foreign immigration to populate its empty northern territory. By 1835, roughly 30,000 American-born settlers lived in Texas compared to about 7,500 Mexican residents. These settlers had brought their own language, their own customs, and their own ideas about governance. When Santa Anna centralized power in Mexico City, dissolved state legislatures, and revoked the 1824 Constitution, Texas wasn't the only province that objected. But Texas had something the others didn't. Thousands of armed frontiersmen who'd grown up on the American border, men who knew how to shoot before they knew how to read. Armed rebellion broke out in October 1835. Texan forces captured San Antonio after a brutal 5-day engagement in December, forcing Mexican General Caz to withdraw south with his garrison. The Texan provisional government assumed the threat was over. Most of the volunteer army dissolved. Men went home to their farms. They were wrong. Santa Anna took the loss of San Antonio personally. He assembled an army and marched north through winter, covering over 1,000 miles in conditions that cost him hundreds of soldiers to cold, exhaustion, and desertion before he ever reached Texas. The men left holding San Antonio numbered around 200. They were under joint command of Colonel William Barrett Travis, a 26-year-old lawyer turned cavalry officer, and Colonel James Bowie, a legendary frontiersman famous for the massive fighting knife that bore his name. The garrison also included David Crockett, former United States Congressman from Tennessee, who had arrived weeks earlier with a small group of volunteer riflemen. These 3 men represented 3 completely different types. Travis was formal, educated, disciplined. Bowie was rough, experienced, a brawler who'd survived more close-range fights than most soldiers see in a career. Crockett was a celebrity, a folk hero whose reputation alone drew volunteers. When Santa Anna's advance force appeared, Travis made a critical decision. Rather than retreat, which was still possible on February 23rd, he moved his garrison into the Alamo compound, an old Spanish mission that had been partially fortified during the earlier battle for San Antonio. From a purely military standpoint, the Alamo was a terrible defensive position. The compound walls stretched nearly 1/4 of a mile in perimeter, far too long for 200 men to defend adequately. The walls were designed for a church, not a fortress. In several places, they were only 3 feet thick, vulnerable to concentrated cannon fire. There were gaps, weak points, and sections where the wall had partially collapsed. But Travis understood something that the raw numbers didn't show. He had 21 artillery pieces, including an 18-pounder cannon, the largest weapon in Texas at that time. His men were extraordinary marksmen. Frontiersmen raised on the American border could reliably hit targets at distances that European-trained soldiers considered impossible. The long rifle, standard weapon of the American frontier, was accurate to 200 yards in trained hands. Mexican infantry carried smooth-bore Brown Bess muskets, effective to maybe 75 yards. That gap in effective range was enormous. Travis positioned his cannons to create overlapping fields of fire covering every approach to the compound. Any assault force crossing open ground toward the walls would be walking through a killing zone nearly 200 yards deep, under aimed rifle fire the entire way. And that is exactly what happened for 13 straight days. Santa Ana began siege operations immediately. Mexican artillery bombarded the compound daily, but his cannons were lighter pieces that couldn't breach the thick limestone walls effectively. He tried probing attacks. Each time, Texan rifle fire drove his infantry back before they reached the walls. On February 24th, Travis wrote a letter addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. He described his situation plainly. The enemy had demanded surrender. He had answered with a cannon shot. He wrote that he would never surrender or retreat, and he signed the letter with 3 words that became immortal: victory or death. That letter was smuggled out through Mexican lines and eventually published across the United States. It electrified the American public. Volunteers began heading toward Texas, though none would arrive in time. Meanwhile, Travis sent repeated messages to Colonel James Fannin at Goliad, 90 miles southeast, requesting immediate reinforcement. Fannin started marching twice and turned back both times, once due to broken wagons, once due to unclear orders. The relief never came. Inside the compound, the defenders developed a remarkably effective defensive routine. By day, Mexican cannon fire forced them to shelter behind the walls. At night, the Texans made repair sorties, rebuilding damaged sections with earth and timber, repositioning guns, improving their fields of fire. Bowie, despite falling severely ill during the siege and spending his final days unable to stand, continued advising on defensive preparations from his cot. Crockett and his Tennessee riflemen held the most vulnerable section of the compound, a low wooden palisade along the south wall between the chapel and the main gate. This was the weakest point in the entire perimeter, and Travis put his best marksmen there precisely because of that weakness. On March 1st, 32 volunteers from Gonzales managed to slip through Mexican lines at night and enter the compound. They were the only reinforcements that ever arrived. The garrison now numbered roughly 250 against a Mexican force that had grown to approximately 4,000 with the arrival of additional battalions. For 13 days, the arithmetic stayed impossible, and the walls held anyway. Here's the tactical reality that most accounts miss entirely. Santa Ana could have simply waited, starved the garrison out. Let thirst and ammunition shortages do the work. His engineers advised exactly this, but Santa Ana chose to assault. Why? Because every day the Alamo held, it gave Sam Houston time. Houston, commander of the Texan Army, was 200 miles east, desperately trying to organize, train, and equip an actual fighting force from scattered volunteers and farmers. Every day Santa Ana spent at the Alamo was a day Houston used to prepare for the fight that would actually decide the war. Santa Ana understood this. He could not afford a prolonged siege. The final assault came before dawn on March 6th. Approximately 1,800 Mexican soldiers advanced on the compound from 4 directions simultaneously. They moved in silence through the darkness, carrying ladders and scaling equipment. The first 2 waves were driven back by devastating cannon and rifle fire. Texan gunners fired their artillery loaded with scrap metal and nails directly into the advancing columns at close range. Mexican officers later reported that entire sections of their assault lines went down in single volleys. But the numbers were overwhelming. On the 3rd attempt, Mexican soldiers reached the north wall, scaled it, and poured into the compound. Once inside the walls, the battle became close quarters. Room by room, position by position, the defenders contested every foot of the compound. The entire final assault lasted approximately 90 minutes. When it was over, virtually every defender had fallen. Estimates vary, but most historians place Texan losses at between 182 and 257. Mexican casualties from the final assault alone were staggering. Between 400 and 600 soldiers were lost in just 90 minutes of fighting. Some estimates run higher. Santa Anna had taken the Alamo, but the cost was catastrophic. What happened next is why those 13 days mattered. News of the Alamo spread across Texas like wildfire. Instead of demoralizing the Texan resistance, it unified it. Remember the Alamo became more than a slogan. It became a battle cry that carried genuine fury. 46 days later, on April 21st, Sam Houston's army caught Santa Anna's force at San Jacinto, near present-day Houston. The Texan army attacked during the afternoon siesta, screaming, "Remember the Alamo," as they charged. The Battle of San Jacinto lasted 18 minutes. In 18 minutes, Houston's force shattered the Mexican army completely. Santa Anna was captured the following day, hiding in a field. He signed the treaties of Velasco, recognizing Texas independence. Those 13 days at the Alamo gave Houston the time he needed to build the army that won at San Jacinto. Without those 13 days, there is no Texan army ready to fight. Without San Jacinto, there is no Republic of Texas. Without the Republic of Texas, the entire westward expansion of the United States follows a completely different path. 200 men behind crumbling church walls, outgunned 20-1, with no relief coming and no way out. They held for 13 days. Not because the walls were strong, they weren't. Not because help was on the way, it wasn't. They held because 200 rifles in the hands of men who knew how to use them, behind walls that shouldn't have worked, supported by cannons positioned by officers who understood geometry better than their enemy, created a defensive position that cost more to take than any general should have been willing to pay. Sometimes a fort doesn't need to be strong. It just needs to hold long enough for the world to change around it.